She was laughing. Loud, carefree, like she hadn't carried a single worry in weeks. Her head was tilted back, eyes crinkled at the corners. That laugh, the one I used to live for, now felt like a splinter beneath my skin. I stood a few feet away, close enough to hear the stories, the mockery disguised as girl talk, the subtle digs at men, at commitment, at the very thing we were supposed to still have. I held the envelope in my hand. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like it weighed more than our entire history. My fingers were curled around it tightly, not out of anger, but to keep them from shaking. I wasn't nervous. Just tired. Tired in a way that no sleep could fix. The party was hers. Her people, her music, her space. She invited me, maybe out of politeness. Or maybe she thought I'd continue being the silent, agreeable background character she'd turned me into. I wasn't even sure she noticed I'd arrived. But I watched her notice everyone else. I watched her light up for people the way she hadn't for me in a long time. I had waited. Waited for the right time, the right words. But there was no right time to say something that would break the ground beneath both of us. There were only 5 words. Simple. Final. She'd recognize them because she wrote them herself. Her laughter softened as she reached for a drink, still talking to her friends. They were the kind of friends who encouraged her to do what makes you happy and don't let a man hold you back, and you're still young, you deserve to feel alive. And maybe they were right. Maybe she did deserve to feel alive. But so did I. I stepped forward. She didn't see me until I was standing in front of her. Her friends fell silent first. Then she turned. Her smile faltered. Confusion flickered across her face like a glitch in a performance she'd rehearsed too well. She said my name, like a question. Like I didn't belong here. I handed her the envelope. She took it, still unsure, and then I said the 5 words. You signed the divorce papers. There was no yelling. No drama. Just stillness. Like the air got sucked out of the entire yard. Her fingers trembled slightly around the paper. Her eyes didn't move, but I saw the panic behind them. Not because she didn't expect this, but because she never thought I'd follow through. I gave her a slight nod. That was all. Then I turned and walked away. No final plea, no last look back. She wasn't the only one done pretending. As I walked to the car, my mind was loud with every moment I'd let slide. Every time I'd chosen peace over truth. Every time I swallowed words I should have spoken. I thought about the nights she came home late, smelling like someone else's cologne but offering excuses I didn't even bother questioning anymore. I thought about the way she'd been laughing more with her friends than she ever did with me lately. And how long it had been since she asked me how I was doing. Really. She wasn't the villain. But she also wasn't innocent. The problem with slow endings is that no one ever hears the final crack. By the time it breaks, it's already been broken for a while. We just stop noticing. People always say divorce is ugly. But I think staying when there's nothing left is uglier. Trying to revive something that's been dead for years, clinging to shared bills, a house, and a last name like they're enough to replace intimacy, trust, or warmth. That's the slow death no one talks about. That's the real betrayal. She thought I'd never leave. I'd reinforced that idea 1,000 times by staying, by accepting crumbs, by smiling through my own quiet disappointment. I used to tell myself I stayed because of love. But the truth is, I stayed because I forgot how to put myself first. That envelope was a declaration not of war, but of peace. I wasn't punishing her. I was saving myself. Later that night, she called. Twice. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to say. And I knew if I heard her voice, I might start doubting again. Doubting the truth I already knew, that love without respect is just emotional blackmail wrapped in nostalgia. She left a voicemail. She didn't yell. She sounded small. Like someone who'd just realized the mirror was finally being held up to her. She said, "We can talk about this." But there was nothing left to talk about. We'd used up our words. I gave her months to meet me halfway. She barely stepped out of her circle. That envelope only looked like paper. What it really held was the first real decision I'd made for myself in years. And somehow, despite everything, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. We weren't always like this. There was a time when just seeing her smile across a crowded room was enough to light me up for a week. She used to scribble little notes and tuck them into my coat pocket before I left for work. I'd find them halfway through the day and just sit there, holding paper like it was gold. Back then, we talked about everything. Books, movies, what we'd name our kids. We'd get groceries at midnight, just because. We had that kind of energy, the kind that makes people believe in forever. I remember the first time she cried in front of me. Not out of sadness, but out of being overwhelmed by love. She'd said, "I didn't know it could feel like this." Neither did I. We built a world together in between shared playlists, long drives, and dreams that felt possible. And somewhere in there, we promised we'd never become like other couples. We promised we'd always choose each other, especially on the hard days. But we didn't know how many hard days there would be. Or how quiet they'd feel. It started small. That's how it always begins. A missed text here, a delayed hug there. Conversations that used to last hours started fading into grunts and nods. I noticed her laughter changed. It wasn't that she stopped laughing, but she stopped laughing with me. And I noticed that my jokes started landing better with coworkers than they did at home. She got busier. Or maybe she just got tired of trying. I'd ask how her day went and she'd say fine, then bury her face in her phone. I thought maybe it was stress, maybe work was draining her. I gave space. I gave grace. And I waited. I kept thinking she'd come back. That she'd reach out and tell me she missed us. But weeks went by, and she never did. The first time I felt truly alone in the marriage, we were sitting next to each other on the couch. That was the strangest part, how loneliness can creep in even when you're side by side. I said something vulnerable, something honest. She nodded, mumbled, yeah, and kept scrolling. I remember thinking, this is the moment she stopped seeing me. I tried to fix things. I asked her to do date nights again. I suggested counseling. She shrugged it all off. Said we didn't need therapy, we just needed to stop being dramatic. But it wasn't drama, it was decay. The kind that eats away at the foundation so slowly, you don't notice it's hollow until you fall through. She started spending more time with her friends. Girls' nights became a weekly ritual. She said they made her feel seen. I didn't argue. But I wondered why she stopped needing me to see her. I wondered if I had stopped seeing her too. I blamed myself, at first. Thought maybe I wasn't enough. I worked more. Tried to provide better. Maybe if I could make life easier, she'd feel lighter again. Maybe she'd come home different. But she never did. In fact, the more I tried, the more she seemed to pull away. Affection became rare. Eye contact even rarer. She began carrying herself like someone single again, confident, distant, and always slightly somewhere else. I noticed her outfits changed. More effort when she went out. Less effort at home. Still, I kept quiet. I told myself, this is a phase. Marriage is work. Be patient. And for a while, that belief kept me going. Until one evening when I saw her smile at her phone and immediately lock the screen when I walked by. That moment didn't just hurt. It confirmed what I'd been avoiding. But I didn't confront her. I didn't want to accuse without proof. So I watched. Silently. I watched her become someone I didn't recognize, while I became invisible in my own home. And in all that silence, the love didn't die in one loud explosion. It dissolved. Bit by bit. Memory by memory. Friends asked how we were. I lied with a smile. Said we were busy, said marriage had its seasons. And they nodded. Everyone nods when you say that. Because everyone's afraid it might be true. I missed her most when she was right in front of me. And that's a kind of pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. The day I realized I didn't know how to make her happy anymore, I just sat in the car for hours after work. I didn't want to walk into the house. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't want to see how indifferent she'd become. Indifference is louder than any fight. It doesn't burn, it freezes. And despite all of that, I still believed we could turn it around. That maybe, one day, she'd wake up and see me again. But what I didn't realize was that she had already moved on. Emotionally, mentally, maybe even physically. She just didn't have the courage to admit it. And I didn't have the courage to leave. Not yet. I stopped asking for affection when I realized every touch from her felt like an obligation. I stopped bringing up problems when I noticed she responded with eye rolls or silence. It wasn't worth the effort to speak when every word bounced off a wall of indifference. That's when the silence between us turned into a barrier, not just a pause. She stopped noticing small things. I changed my haircut, she didn't comment. I got promoted, she gave a half-hearted "that's nice" and went back to texting. She didn't ask questions anymore. Didn't follow up. It was like being slowly erased in real time. I wasn't her partner. I was part of the furniture. She still said "I love you" sometimes, but only out of habit. It sounded like a script she didn't want to rewrite. I used to say it back immediately, like a reflex. Then one day, I didn't. I just looked at her and said nothing. She didn't even notice. The emotional distance became a normal part of our day. Mornings were cold, nights were colder. I started sleeping facing the other direction. Not because I wanted to, but because turning toward her felt like setting myself up for rejection. There's only so many times you can reach out and feel nothing before you stop reaching. I wondered if she felt it too. Or if she genuinely believed we were fine because we weren't screaming at each other. But absence of conflict isn't peace. It's often just two people who've given up. I gave up the day I realized I was more relaxed at work than at home. I watched her carefully for signs that she still cared. A glance. A smile. A question about my day. I started measuring love by crumbs. That's when I knew something was wrong, not just with her, but with me. I was begging for the bare minimum and calling it enough. Then came the secrecy. The late-night phone calls in the bathroom. The sudden password on her phone. The laughter she reserved only for people who weren't me. I wasn't dumb. I just didn't want to believe the obvious. It's amazing what denial can do when you're afraid of starting over. She claimed I was paranoid. Told me I was imagining things. Said I was insecure. That's what made it worse. Not just the emotional betrayal, but the gaslighting that followed. Making me feel like I was the problem for noticing she had changed. I started questioning my own judgment. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I expected too much. But deep down, I knew. You don't need to catch someone in bed with another person to feel cheated on. Sometimes, emotional betrayal cuts deeper than anything physical. The turning point wasn't explosive. It was quiet. I remember sitting at the dinner table one night, trying to explain how I felt. I used calm words. No accusations. Just honesty. She looked at me like I was being dramatic. Like emotional starvation wasn't a valid complaint. She said, "You're overthinking it. You always do." That's when I realized something simple and painful. She wasn't listening because she didn't care anymore. From that moment on, I stopped trying to fix us. I started focusing on fixing myself. I began writing again, something I hadn't done in years. I reconnected with friends I had let drift. I joined a gym, not to impress her, but to feel like myself again. I went to therapy. I sat across from a stranger and spilled the parts of myself I had hidden from even me. And in that chair, for the first time, I said it out loud, "I'm not happy. I'm not okay. I don't think I'm loved anymore." The therapist didn't offer a magic fix. She just nodded and said, "You've been surviving. It's time to live." That line stuck with me. I'd been surviving a marriage that looked good from the outside but felt like slow suffocation on the inside. I kept showing up out of loyalty, not love. I kept hoping she'd change, when the truth was, she already had. Just not in the way I needed. People think toxic relationships are loud, chaotic, full of fighting and screaming. But sometimes, they're quiet. Peaceful, even. Like drowning in calm water. No sound. No thrashing. Just the slow realization that you can't breathe. I stopped begging. Stopped chasing. Stopped offering emotional intimacy to someone who treated it like a burden. I started setting boundaries, not with her, but with myself. I told myself I wouldn't keep sacrificing my peace just to keep the illusion of a relationship alive. One night, I looked at her while she was asleep and realized I didn't feel anything. Not love. Not hate. Just numbness. And that scared me more than anything else. Because numbness means the end. When even anger is gone, there's no fight left to have. The next morning, I downloaded the divorce papers. Not because I was ready to end everything, but because I was finally willing to stop betraying myself. I told no one. Not even my closest friend. I needed to be sure this wasn't coming from pain, but from clarity. That was the moment I chose myself. Not out of revenge. Not out of bitterness. But out of quiet, exhausted self-respect. I realized that love without connection is just performance. And I was done acting. I didn't file the papers right away. I kept them in a drawer for 2 weeks. Not because I was unsure, but because I needed to feel the weight of what I was about to do. Ending a marriage isn't one decision, it's 1,000 silent ones stacked on top of each other. It's all the times I told myself maybe tomorrow and all the nights I convinced myself it wasn't that bad. But it was that bad. I just stopped calling it what it was. I renamed neglect as distance, called disrespect stress, and wore denial like armor. That's how people stay longer than they should, by changing the labels until they stop recognizing what they're actually living through. I thought she might notice. The change in me. The way I stopped chasing her. The way my questions stopped coming. I thought she might ask, might reach out, might show some flicker of fear that she was losing me. But she didn't. She just enjoyed the quiet, not realizing it was the calm before I left. It's strange how someone can be everything to you once, and then one day, just be there. Sharing a house, not a life. Sharing a schedule, not a soul. We became two people fulfilling roles. The wife who was always out, the husband who kept the house running. The performance was still going, but the script had ended long ago. She never asked where I was going when I stayed out late. She never noticed when I started sleeping on the edge of the bed. At some point, I could have been a stranger walking in and out of the house and she wouldn't have blinked. That's when I knew, really knew, she had already left emotionally. I was just late catching up. I started planning my exit carefully. Not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. Quietly organizing documents, closing joint accounts, preparing myself for the moment I would no longer be a husband. It felt surreal, how simple it was to undo something that took years to build. Marriage ends with paperwork. It begins with dreams. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to expose her or destroy her reputation. What we had, for a while, was real. But what we had now wasn't. And I wasn't going to live in something false just to keep other people comfortable. People often say, but what if she changes? The truth is, people don't change when they don't think they're doing anything wrong. She thought everything was fine. Because for her, it was. She had freedom, support, zero accountability, and a husband who kept showing up. Why would she change that? The shift came when I realized I wasn't trying to save the marriage anymore, I was trying to save myself from it. That clarity hits hard. There's a difference between being loyal to your partner and being loyal to your pain. I had been loyal to pain for too long. The final push came one night when I overheard her laughing on the phone again. That same carefree, joyful laugh. It wasn't the laugh that hurt. It was knowing that I hadn't heard it in our conversations for over a year. She didn't sound like someone in a struggling marriage. She sounded free. So I asked myself, why was I still pretending? Why was I holding on to someone who had already emotionally let go of me? I wasn't staying for love anymore. I was staying out of fear, fear of change, fear of judgment, fear of regret. But fear isn't a reason to stay. It's a reason to run. That week, I filed the papers. Quietly. No grand declarations. No emotional announcements. I didn't tell her until everything was official. And when I handed her the envelope, I didn't expect a dramatic reaction. I knew her too well. I expected confusion, maybe denial. What I didn't expect was silence. Not even a question. She just took the envelope, looked at it, and blinked. Like she couldn't decide whether to be shocked or relieved. I almost laughed at the irony. The most intimate thing we'd shared in months was a legal document. I told her, "You signed the divorce papers." She stared at me, waiting for more. But there wasn't more. I wasn't looking for an apology. I wasn't hoping she'd fight for us. That part of me had died quietly over the last year. I wasn't angry, I was done. In that moment, I didn't feel like a man ending a marriage. I felt like someone waking up after a long sleep. Everything looked clearer. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her harm. But I also didn't owe her any more of myself. Letting go wasn't easy. But holding on had been killing me slowly. I had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without the weight of disappointment. I had forgotten what it meant to feel seen. And I wasn't going to forget myself just to remember us. I walked away, not because I stopped loving her, but because I started loving me. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. The first morning after I left, I woke up and didn't know what to do with the quiet. It wasn't the same silence I lived with before. This one felt clean. Still unfamiliar, but lighter. I made coffee, sat alone, and realized I hadn't done that in years, just sat with myself without waiting for someone to respond, approve, or notice me. Grief came in waves. Not just for the marriage, but for the version of me who stayed too long. I missed the idea of what we used to be more than I missed her. I had to remind myself that nostalgia lies. It filters out the pain and plays back the highlight reel. But the truth was, I left for a reason. And every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of how small I had become just to make that relationship work. People started asking questions. Close friends, co-workers, even my parents. Most were shocked. Some offered sympathy. A few wanted the full story. But I didn't give details. Not because I was protecting her, but because I was protecting my peace. I didn't want to relive the damage just to justify the decision. The people who needed to know already did. There were moments I almost called her. Out of habit, not hope. When something funny happened, when a familiar song came on, when loneliness hit hard. But I didn't. I had to relearn what it meant to sit with discomfort instead of running back to what broke me. Healing wasn't a straight line. Some days, I felt proud and strong. Other days, I felt hollow. But each day, I kept showing up for myself. I learned to enjoy my own company again. I cooked. I read. I reconnected with old friends, not to distract myself, but to rebuild what I had let erode in isolation. Therapy became a mirror I couldn't avoid. It forced me to confront the patterns I had normalized, how often I abandoned my own needs to avoid conflict, how I tolerated emotional neglect because I didn't want to seem too sensitive. I had confused silence for strength. I thought endurance was love. It wasn't. The hardest part wasn't losing her, it was facing the truth about myself. I had accepted a love that made me feel small because I was afraid no one else would choose me. I called it maturity, but really, it was fear dressed up as sacrifice. I had to forgive myself for staying. I had to forgive myself for trying to fix someone who didn't see anything broken. And most importantly, I had to forgive myself for forgetting that I was allowed to be loved fully, not partially. People romanticize leaving toxic relationships, like the moment you walk out, everything gets better. It doesn't. What actually happens is you sit with the wreckage and wonder if you did the right thing. You replay moments. You question your memory. You grieve what could have been. But slowly, you stop looking back. The silence stops being empty and starts becoming sacred. I didn't date right away. Not because I wasn't ready, but because I didn't want to use someone else to validate my healing. I needed to find out who I was outside of being someone's partner. I had lost that version of me. I wanted him back. I started noticing things again. The way I carried myself changed. I walked slower. Laughed more. I didn't check my phone expecting disappointment. I no longer feared coming home to cold silence or subtle jabs. Peace replaced tension. That alone was worth everything. She reached out once. A short message. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. No apology. No reflection. Just surprise. That told me everything. She never thought I'd choose myself. She thought I'd always bend. She mistook my loyalty for weakness. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because I had nothing left to say. I had already said everything in the months of trying. She heard it all and chose not to listen. My silence now wasn't revenge. It was closure. The freedom that came from not explaining myself was powerful. I didn't owe her a final conversation. I didn't owe her my voice after she ignored it for so long. Sometimes closure isn't a talk, it's a boundary. And mine was silence. As months passed, I grew into a version of myself that didn't carry bitterness. I stopped telling the story like I was the victim. I wasn't. I was a person who made hard choices to save his own soul. That didn't make me broken. It made me brave. Eventually, love didn't feel like a painful memory anymore. It felt like something I still believed in. But this time, I wasn't rushing toward it to fill a void. I was building a life where love would be a bonus, not a rescue mission. I started recognizing red flags earlier. Not just in others, but in myself. The urge to over-accommodate. The fear of setting boundaries. The anxiety that came when someone pulled away. I met those parts of me with compassion, not judgment. That was growth. Divorce didn't ruin me. It revealed me. It showed me how far I was willing to go for love and how far I needed to go to love myself. I didn't need to be rescued. I needed to stop abandoning myself every time someone else made me feel small. And now, I don't settle. Not for half love, not for lukewarm commitment, not for someone who only shows up when it's convenient. I've learned that peace is better than forced connection. I've learned that silence can be beautiful when it's chosen, not endured. Most of all, I've learned that love shouldn't feel like doubt. It shouldn't feel like effort just to be seen. It should feel like home, and home isn't a place where you constantly feel like you're about to be left. I used to think leaving meant failure. Now I know it meant freedom. Time didn't heal everything, but it gave me perspective. Distance has a way of sharpening the truth. I stopped asking why it happened. I stopped obsessing over what I could have done differently. I had already done more than enough. At some point, the question stopped being why did she stop loving me, and became why did I keep loving her when she stopped showing up? There's this dangerous belief that love should hurt. That struggle is proof of depth. That staying, no matter what, is a badge of honor. But that kind of loyalty is a slow death. I wore it like armor, thinking it made me strong. All it did was teach me how to ignore myself. Love isn't about suffering quietly and calling it patience. It's not about shrinking just to be easier to love. Real love feels safe, reciprocal, and consistent. It doesn't leave you guessing. It doesn't make you feel like you're competing for basic attention. I learned that too late, but I learned it. I spent months rebuilding myself, not as a reaction to her, but for me. I let go of bitterness because carrying it felt like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. I started redefining my standards not just for future relationships, but for how I treat myself. The truth is, I used to tolerate too much because I feared being alone. I thought being unwanted in a relationship was better than being single. Now I know better. Alone isn't the problem, lonely with someone who doesn't value you is worse. Much worse. If I could go back, I wouldn't change how I loved her. I wouldn't regret giving my all. What I would change is how long I stayed after I realized I was the only one trying. You can't love someone into being present. You can't give so much that it convinces them to care. Love doesn't work like that. It either flows both ways, or it's not love. It's survival. People ask if I'd ever marry again. The answer is yes, but not like before. Next time, I won't ignore red flags. I won't confuse compatibility with chemistry. I won't fall in love with potential and call it a future. And I definitely won't keep watering something that doesn't want to grow. I've learned to listen more, especially to what isn't said. Silence speaks. Disinterest is communication. Emotional absence is a message. I used to look for reasons to stay. Now I look for signs that someone is emotionally present from the start. To anyone going through it who feels invisible in their relationship, who feels like they're constantly auditioning for love, let me say this: you're not asking for too much. You're just asking the wrong person. The right one won't make you beg for the bare minimum. If they don't ask how you're doing, if they only listen to reply, If your needs are always too much for them, believe them. That's not love. That's conditional tolerance. And if you don't draw a line, they will keep moving it until you don't recognize yourself anymore. Leaving isn't weakness. Staying in pain is. And yes, leaving will hurt. But that pain will pass. Staying in a place where you feel unwanted creates a kind of ache that lasts far longer and damages far deeper. There's life after loss. There's peace after chaos. And there's love after heartbreak. But only if you stop settling for someone who treats you like an option while you treat them like home. It took me years to understand that walking away isn't selfish, it's survival. Especially when you've done all you could, and all that's left is to save yourself. I no longer define myself by the person I was in that marriage. That version of me was well-intentioned but lost. He believed love meant holding on at all costs. I now know real love means knowing when to hold on and when to let go. The most dangerous thing about a toxic relationship isn't just the damage it causes. It's what it convinces you to normalize. The silence. The dismissal. The emotional starvation. And once you accept that as just how it is, you lose sight of what healthy even looks like. But once you've left, once you've healed, your standards shift. You stop accepting crumbs and calling it a meal. You stop twisting yourself into shapes to fit someone else's comfort zone. You realize you're allowed to be whole without needing someone else to complete you. I'm proud of the man I've become. Not perfect, not flawless, but honest. And real. I don't hide my scars. They're part of the story. Not a shameful chapter, but a turning point. I no longer fear love. I just approach it differently. I love with eyes open. I listen to patterns, not promises. I value consistency over charm. And I trust actions, not potential. Would I love again? Yes. But not recklessly. Not by losing myself. Not by lowering my standards just to avoid being alone. I'll love like a man who's been broken, rebuilt, and refuses to break for anyone else again. The truth is, I didn't lose when the marriage ended. I found the version of me that I buried to make it work. And that's someone worth holding on to. You can survive betrayal. You can walk out of emotional neglect and still believe in love. But only if you stop betraying yourself first. In the end, those 5 words I spoke didn't destroy everything. They saved me.